Hello, everyone. I'm Jasmine from the Future Blue Youth Council, and today I'm joined by Ewen and Sarah to talk about community projects. So just to remind everyone, the Future Blue Fellowship is a opportunity created by the Future Blue Youth Council, where you can bring us your water-based environmental projects, and we will offer support in the form of toolkits, webinars, advice, and as well as a grant that you can apply for, and the deadline is closing August 1st. So we'll talk about that more at the end, but you can check it out by just Googling Bowseat Future Blue Youth Council, and then it'll pop up and you can check all the information. So I think to start, it'd be great to have you both introduce yourselves and introduce your project.
My name is Ewen. I'm based in Christchurch, New Zealand, and I'm a Future Blue Youth Council member as well. So my project is P.S. Our Beaches, Plastic Solution for Our Beaches, which is an organisation which advances the education and understanding of the effects of single-use plastics and the ways through which we mitigate them. And we do this through litter audits, beach cleanups, conferences, tree plantings, and more, including EnviroPAST, plastic and sustainability talks. So EnviroPAST is a youth conference which combines talks by experts in the field with interactive workshops and a practical action event like a litter audit or a beach cleanup. And so in summary, it's all about learning about environmental issues in an accessible way, whilst also leveraging that learning with practical action.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm from Ontario, Canada, and my project is Muslim Artists for Justice, or MAJ for short, which is a youth-led initiative that started in December 2020, dedicated to giving young Muslim artists the opportunity to share their opinions and bring awareness to social issues that affect our community. So the way we do this is we highlight a different social issue every month, and then we give Muslim youth the opportunity to submit visual art, music, poetry, or prose, along with reflections to elevate their voices. And then these submissions are presented in a newsletter campaign, which gets distributed to community leaders and organizations to generate discussion and change. And outside of our newsletter, MAJ hosts workshops and events to encourage Muslim youth to become engaged and active in their community.
All right, and like I said, I'm Jasmine from Victoria, BC, Canada, and my project's a little different. So back in 2019, I created a small business called Ocean Child Creative, where I make art inspired by the ocean, and then some of the proceeds from that go back to supporting local ocean organizations near me. And then I also use that business to connect with local organizations and do work with them. And then it's also led me to do all sorts of cool things like finding Bowseat and entering in their contest. I've also done an at-home mural festival with Pangea Seed during the pandemic. And I've been lucky enough to connect with lots of different marine conservation organizations in the area and learn from them and work with them as well. So what was your inspiration for these projects? How did they start? How did they get going initially? And did you do it with anyone, or did you do it by yourself? These are all questions that I'm super curious to actually find out about.
Okay, I guess I can go first. So for me, Muslim Artists for Justice was inspired by my experience growing up facing discrimination because of my identity as a Muslim woman, growing up in a predominantly white neighborhood and community. And so like this experience growing up made me realize the importance of having a safe space devoid of discrimination, prejudice, and racism. And so I knew that there were a lot of Muslim youth in my community that were facing the same struggles as myself. So I wanted to create a platform that would make Muslim youth feel safe, valued, and above all, heard. So the first thing I did was message my friend, because like I mentioned before, I created this organization fairly recently in December 2020, so during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I messaged her and I was like, you know what, do you want to make an organization? It was so random. And she was like, sure. So The first thing we did was make this giant Google Doc and just brainstorm as many ideas as possible because we knew we wanted to combine social activism and art, but we weren't sure how. So we just brain dumped on a Google Doc and picked out the ideas that we liked and created an Instagram page, and it just went off from there. So yeah.
Yeah, so my PSR Beaches, the seed of it was kind of planted way back in the past when, well, not that far back, but I was 10 years old and I was involved in a program called Future Problem Solving. It's an academic competition which develops creative, critical and caring thinking skills through the process of confronting global issues, identifying underlying problems and creating positive solutions. So at the 2013 national finals, it was themed Ocean Soup. It was all about plastic pollution, and I was confronted by like this massive issue which you just couldn't overlook as a 10-year-old. And then I quickly became passionate about reducing single-use plastics and sharing my passions and experiences through poetry, which was something I was also developing. And so that's how I came to know about Bowsy. And when I won one of their silver awards, I put that towards creating PSR Beaches, kickstarting it, and then it was actually quite circular because I ended up using the future problem solving framework to guide how PSR Beaches would function as an organization. And then subsequently, EnviroPAST came to be. That's our flagship conference, and that was after recognizing a gap in environmental education, so namely a lacking space for students to channel their learnings from the classroom and learn to put that into action while connecting with other youth. And so it started off kind of mostly by myself, but then I think you realize that you really need a supportive team around you to make the most impact that you can have. So yeah, I've managed to just pull lots of volunteers and create a cool network around me and a cool team. So yeah, we're here today.
They're both such good stories. So Ocean Child, I started it on my own mostly because I was making art anyways. I was making a lot of ocean art just for fun. And people around me started to kind of say, I'd like that as a print or as a card. And I tend to have the attitude of, okay, how hard can it be? I'll just figure it out, which often actually pays off, such as with these webinars. So I did that. I created a small run of prints and people bought them. And it was great because I wanted a way to make some money and have time to create art because unless kind of it was making money or had a real, or was like as a part of a class, then I honestly didn't have much time for it. And so I started doing that and it worked out well. I started going to markets and it is kind of on my own, but I'm so lucky that my family and friends are so supportive. So often my best friend will come and run market stands with me, or they'll help me, package things or whatever along the way. And of course, in the community, it's been so nice to meet everyone who kind of makes these types of things happen. So meeting people who run the print shop and meeting people who own the different stores who sell my stuff, all of that is so cool. And it kind of creates a little like network almost that you can see in your own city. And so that's been so nice, especially during a pandemic when I couldn't really see anyone in person. I was able to continue making these connections online mostly. So that was just fantastic. So obviously my business is pretty art focused, given that I sell art, but you guys are also both artists. And I'd love to know how that kind of plays into these projects.
Yeah, so as you say, your project is so cool and so really arts based, and whereas mine is more like trying to drip arts inside it and kind of integrate that in little ways. So at the last EnviroPAST conference, one of our speakers was a spoken word poet, so a local spoken word poet, and she was speaking about like climate change and her environmentally infused poetry. And so we also always try to include some sort of artivism in our event. So that's art activism, for those of you who don't know. And so one of the last cleanups that we did, the plastic pieces that were collected were then used in workshops in schools to make art pieces. So that's a way of trying to educate while also providing that art element as well. And then another of our upcoming projects is a school-based program to facilitate workshops which deliver both science-based content around environmental issues and also promote students to express their learnings and understandings through poetry. So I think it's quite weird because like I'm studying law and science, which is not art, but I'm really passionate about the intersection between science and arts, because I think it like combines rationality and emotionality. And like if you look to the past, science and art were used to explain the world around us through like scientific illustrations, and today it allows us to reach a large audience and to create an environment where we are always questioning, changing and acting. And Bowseat is a really good organization which bridges the art and science and allows teens to find a space to connect through art and using that to advocate for ocean issues. So check it out.
Definitely do. Especially if anyone is watching this and is going to or is creating a project and going to apply for the fellowship or even not applying for the fellowship, I think it's really worth thinking about how to incorporate art into that project, even though, you know, it just has to be an environmental project. Doing something with a little bit of art, I think can be super beneficial. And especially when you're learning about these problems, it's so helpful to be able to create art about it. And I know Bowseat runs the contest, which we've all participated in. And it is, I think, creating art about an environmental issue, you have to not only kind of look at the issue and understand it scientifically, which is where a lot of science stops, and that's awesome. But when you're creating art about it, you have to look at it, understand it scientifically, emotionally process it, have you think about it for a long time, and then be able to regurgitate what you're feeling onto a piece of paper for the world to see. And so you are able to internalize it more. And I think that can lead to better quality ideas in terms of projects or art. So I would definitely encourage anyone to think about that when they're creating their projects.
For sure. And I just wanted to touch on like the importance of art. Like art is such an incredible tool in the activism space specifically because it's so much more accessible than, like, for example, listening to a 2-hour documentary on why science proves climate change is real. Like it okay, it's like art is like a universally understood medium. Like no matter who you are, where you come from, how old you are, especially, or what language you speak, when you see a painting or a form of art, the the boundaries of languages can be pushed through, and you can um, uh, observe it and uh, express. You can look at it. When you look at it, you feel like the emotions, and it's easier to understand. So yeah, I just thought art is such an incredible tool in the activism space, and I would highly encourage anyone who's trying to use it, whether through environmental justice or social justice. It's definitely a very good tool to use.
It definitely makes things more approachable. I know when I'm learning about science or different issues or activism, learning about it through, you know, a podcast or a blog post or a piece of art that all have used art to communicate that science, it makes it so much more enjoyable and so much more digestible than just, you know, a list of facts. So I know that we all have been affected by COVID, and I know that Ewan has had a slightly shorter experience than Sarah and I in Canada. But what did you guys do to kind of change your projects, or Sarah starting your project in a pandemic? Like, what was that like? What did you guys do to adapt?
Okay, I guess I can start. Like Jasmine mentioned, Madge was started during the pandemic. So all of the events that we've done and initiatives that we've done have been in an online format. even though we're physically distant, the internet, the internet is such a powerful tool that can connect you with so many people across the world. And I feel like it is so, like, people don't use it to the potential that it has. It really, having an online space for your platform is so powerful. So the way we got our organization started was, the first thing we did was make an Instagram page, because social media definitely allowed us to connect with a lot of people, and we wanted to use Match to spread awareness, and social media is the best tool to do that. So to like, my biggest advice for navigating a project during the pandemic is definitely take advantage of social media. Use Canva to make social media posts. We have a really good toolkit on our Bowseat website about that gives a bunch of tips about communicating your project across different mediums, including social media. So that would be a really good resource to check out. Um, but yeah, definitely use different social media platforms.
Yeah, I totally agree, especially on that point about harnessing digital tools. So obviously, as Jasmine alluded to, we were quite lucky in New Zealand not to have such prolonged lockdowns or protracted periods of social isolation. But during the disruption, I think it was a really good opportunity to learn to maximize our use of digital tools, and also use it as a time for ideation, reflection, in looking inwardly into the organization and thinking about how can we improve future events and how can we make them more accessible. So for example, this year for EnviroPAST, we're going to be live streaming all of the sessions so that people, no matter where they are or no matter what happens, like across the country with COVID or internationally, people can still have access to the talks, the sessions, the education that the speakers are imparting onto our attendees. And so for grant applicants, really that try to look at the positive sides of what the COVID pandemic has allowed for you. Obviously make those precautions, make those backup plans, but think about, like, don't let it be a dampener. Every cloud is a silver lining.
So true. And I agree with, like, I was going to say what both of you said with social media and with accessibility. Like for me, the way it kind of worked was shops kind of all closed. I live in a tourist town, so basically all of the shops downtown couldn't take in new stock. And so instead I pivoted, instead of kind of selling stuff, to just creating stuff. And so I created a whole new page on my website for teachers mostly, or for kids at home with parents trying to homeschool them, about with all the ocean resources in the area. So there's like, it's still up. There's everything from book recommendations to documentary recommendations to all the hydrophone. There's hydrophones nearby that are live streamed, which is super cool. Live cameras from the aquariums, links to different organizations who had stuff on their website, like aquariums or educational organizations. And it was really great to hear the feedback from teachers. A couple of them used it in their classrooms. And so that was the kind of using the internet to make things a little more accessible. And then on the other end of it, there was a mural festival that Pangea Seed and Seawalls ran. And so they run these mural festivals. They've been running them for a while in different cities. I think there's going to be one in Boston that Bowseat is working with soon. But basically, these professional artists come together and create a bunch of murals all over the city, about a different theme, but it's always ocean based. But obviously in a pandemic they couldn't do this, and so instead they ran a festival called the At Home Mural Festival, I think, where they invited anyone to create a mural around the theme of the ocean. And so of course I would never have had the chance to go to another city and paint a giant mural, and so instead I didn't even have a wall that I could paint on. So I dug out an old mirror and an old window frame, painted on them, and I was able to participate in that way. And so I really appreciated that was something they did to make it more accessible. And it's definitely something that I'm going to be thinking about in creating projects, because it was so much fun and something I totally would not have had the chance to do any other way. And so I'm hoping that people continue that, and I'm hoping to continue that in the future. So speaking of kind of accessibility, one of the big challenges with creating any project is support. So I love to talk about kind of support networks. Obviously, the three of us are very supported by Bowseat, and we love them. But who else is supporting your work, and what do your support networks look like?
So for me, so far, like since our organization is pretty new, our team looks like me and my friend, just the two of us. So definitely getting that support has been one of the strongest challenges that we've had to deal with. But the way that we navigated that was, instead of waiting for an opportunity to come to us, like someone like the fellowship grant program, instead of waiting for something like that to come up, we we messaged different organizations that were also advocating for Muslims and youth across the world. So like I mentioned earlier, one thing that we do in our organization is we have a newsletter campaign where we send all the submissions that we receive from Muslim youth in our community, and we distribute it to different organizations and community leaders in hopes of generating discussion and change. So when we reach out to different organizations, each newsletter campaign, like our email list, is usually 50 organizations and plus, and maybe we'll get like 3 responses if we're lucky. But the people that do respond generally are very supportive. For example, My Voice Canada is a Muslim youth magazine that is dedicated to elevating the voices of Muslim youth. So we were able to connect with them. And through these connections, we were able to actually host an event with My Voice and also some other Muslim organizations that helped us, gave us a platform to elevate our organization and get more awareness. So I would say one of my biggest points of advice would be, don't wait for someone to give you the resources. Don't wait for someone to just hand it over like, oh, I'm giving you some money. Like, you got to put in the effort to reach out. And even it might feel like you're just annoying these busy, big organizations, but they genuinely want to hear about what you're doing, and it'll pay off when you reach out, make the effort to reach out on your own. And yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
No, go for it, Ewan.
No, you go, Jasmine.
Okay, all I was gonna say was definitely don't be afraid to email people. It's and reach out to people. I know emailing people is so boring, and you totally feel like you're just annoying them, and often you don't get a response, but it really is fantastic. That's how I got involved with Airs, and basically how I've got anywhere with my business is just by emailing people constantly, sending follow-up emails, DMing them on Instagram. And often if they don't respond, it's often that they haven't seen it or that they're very busy. So don't be afraid to email them again. And sometimes they'll just politely decline, and that's fine. And then you just email more people. But that's definitely my piece of advice, is like, don't be afraid to reach out to anyone. Because so many people are willing to help you, and they will, and it's great to make those connections.
Yeah, I think that was a thing that kind of filtered through the Ears to Our Oceans webinar, if you want to check it out as well. Yeah, so I agree, like definitely approaching organizations, because there's so much expertise within them. So it might be like that main groups within the organization, and sometimes you just find this one individual within the organization that you really resonate with and really connect with. So some of the organizations that I've worked with, that Bowseat obviously, and then Sustainable Coastlines and Algalita, and it's really cool because they've usually got a much broader network, but then the difference between our organizations and their organizations is quite youth focused. So we're able to channel that understanding of those learnings that they provide us with, but also like try to recraft it so that it's more targeted to young people. Also with support networks, I think teachers or staff at high school, university, extracurricular groups are always really helpful. Usually because they're quite detached from your project, they can look at it from fresh eyes, give you some advice, and just have someone to talk through your ideas with. And then lastly, making sure you've got a really good team around you who all have like different skills that they can offer. So yeah.
I just wanted
People.
to add, sorry. I just wanted to add that on the topic of like reaching out to organizations, I'm pretty sure that Bausi has like on their student resources page, they have like a huge map of like different ocean organizations around the world. So like if you're interested in creating an environmental project and you aren't really aware of what resources or organizations around you are out there that are doing the same thing, it would be a really good resource to check out. And honestly, Bausi has so many resources like the Bausi Gallery that has so much inspiration, and also our toolkits and webinars that are on the Future Blue Youth page. So yeah.
Yeah, and don't look at, I know on Bausi's resources page, there's, I think the map, there's also a list of internships and programs, and you could also look at that and see who's running those, and they might be willing to help you. And if you're also looking to get in touch with people, you can also email us at our Future Blue email account, which will be in the description of this webinar, but I'll also put it in the chat in a second. And then the other thing is, don't be afraid to ask us questions now during this webinar. We will be happy to answer them, or you can DM us on Instagram or email us. But we're all here and ready to help you with any questions, especially about the application stage right now. If anyone has questions on how to fill out the application, language barriers, anything like that, we may not have all of the answers, but we're very willing to try. And there's a lot of us who are ready to help. So don't be afraid to do that. So now that we've plugged Bausi once again, we'll do it a couple more times before the end of this webinar for sure. What are the best parts about creating a project? Like for me, it's definitely seeing, especially kids, engage with the art. And I think I had a video sent to me once. I have a print of all the different whales that live in the area. And so it's like the whale and then their name underneath. And I had a video, my aunt sent it to me of my little baby cousin. She was like 2 years old and she was pointing to the whales. She couldn't read. She was pointing to the whales and saying their names. And that was like the coolest thing to me. Because when I can see people engage and they ask questions just off of like a painting of whales, and I get to, totally nerd out and tell them about all the whales or the environmental issues or how they can get involved, that's the best part of it for me. And so I'd love to know what the best parts of it are for you guys.
Oh my gosh, there's like so many. Okay, how do I pick one? Okay, I guess since our organization is mainly social media based right now because of the pandemic, one of the best parts is like seeing how many people interact with our posts and content, because it feels like what I'm doing is really resonating with people and helping others, especially when it gets a lot of attention. For example, one of our posts a while back about like Palestine got over 10,000 likes, which like normally we get like 30 to 40. So it was like amazing. Just seeing how many people were paying attention to our organization and how many people were interacting with it. And also another part that I really, really enjoy is reviewing the art submissions that we receive and looking at the different reflections of people when they include with their art submission, because it's just so incredible to read about all these different perspectives that people have about issues that are not only affecting me but Muslim youth everywhere. So that's really amazing and really rewarding. And also the reach that we're able to have through social media. Like I know we talked a little bit about how social media is so amazing and powerful and yada 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 before, but like in 6 months we were able to receive art submissions from 5 different countries, which is just amazing when I think about it. Like, it's so cool just thinking about how how much of an impact you can have. Like, it's just me and my friend working together, but how much impact two people can have on even just doing their own thing in their house in the middle of the pandemic is just so incredible when you think about it. So yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a theme that both of you kind of touched on, which is the best part was really in the aftermath of the manifestation of the project. So after like the outputs and just that reflection. So that's also my best part of the project. So post project, when people tell you how the organization's events have influenced their daily choices or made them think or even inspired them to deliver a similar event in the future, that's just the best feeling ever. And then when you're doing like feedback, and then after EnviroPAST, we did a feedback form, and then the average response to the question, how likely are you to recommend EnviroPAST to a friend or colleague, was like 9.6 out of 10. And we were like, okay, this really gives us like the impetus to create a future EnviroPAST conference and continue to be delivering these kinds of events, because obviously people are benefiting from them and they want to see them go forward in the future. So yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely the people's reactions. I mean, when you're starting a project, it's like going into a dark, scary tunnel and you have no idea what's going to come out the other side. You're just like, free falling a little bit. But then when you're able to engage with people and see what you did has made a difference and that they're engaging with it and liking it, it makes it all worth it. But obviously it's not all just sunshine and rainbows and getting to see people engage. So what are the hardest parts? Because we want to give people an accurate representation about what creating a project is like. So for me, it's probably just the amount of time spent on emailing and website updates and all of that. And it's totally not bad, but it's definitely not the most fun part, but it is I think the most work. So what is it for you guys?
Okay, hands down, 100%. The hardest part is balancing mental health for me, because as two people working on such a huge project, it definitely takes a toll on you, especially when you're doing 8 hours plus every week on top of school, on top of assignments, on top of this year especially was super stressful for me because I was applying for university. So all of these different factors, it was really hard to balance our mental health, both me and my friends. And oftentimes I would, when we'd be working really hard, sometimes there'd be tension between us. So it's hard to maintain having a work relationship, but also being really close friends. It can be very difficult sometimes. And so the way we decided to manage that was take a break. Sometimes you just got to take a break. We agreed that during July, since we started in December, so since from December to June, we've been doing nonstop everyday posting, doing events, and we decided July we're not going to do anything. We're just going to take a break. We're going to just enjoy the summer and take care of our mental health. And sometimes that's what needs to be done. Sometimes you have to understand that, you can't do everything by yourself, and we're only human. And especially in the activism space, it's very easy to get caught up in the work that you're doing and not pay attention to your mental health and your health in general. So take breaks.
Yeah, like Jasmine, I am not a fan of the admin, and a lot of these sorts of events, there's so much of it. And I think when you look at the hardest and least fun parts of the project, there's always the technicalities differ between the projects. But for me, the overarching one has kind of been self-doubt. So I'm quite cognizant of the fact that I'm not an expert. I don't possess all the knowledge on the subject matter, even if I would like to. And that can feed into situations when you doubt whether you're the right person to be delivering your project. And I guess in the way I have overcome that is to realize that in taking action, you're imparting at least some knowledge onto your community, and the alternative is no action, which is really no alternative at all. So yeah, I guess self-doubt, something that has been a big hard bit to navigate, but you know, we're getting there.
Yeah, definitely the admin work is the most time consuming, but the self-doubt and balancing it with school and making sure that everyone's mental health is staying in good shape is probably the hardest. Um, and especially when we're all dealing with issues that are not super fun. Like none of these projects, I mean, they're fun projects and they're great and they're spreading positivity and change, but the actual issues underneath them are not ones that are, you know, uplifting. And so sometimes it's important to step back from that. And I know during our AIRS conference, actually, we were talking about this, or webinar, sorry, and they were all saying the same thing, and they were all saying the importance of making connections and talking to people, and that's what kept them going. This is actually a perfect segue into our next question. So how do you balance these projects with school? And then also what do you do to keep your mental health in good shape while doing all this?
I can start. So for me, being organized is super, super important, especially with school. And I'm going into a really difficult program next year. I'm going into mechatronics engineering, which is kind of like weird. Doesn't really have anything to do with activism, I guess, but I'm hoping to combine activism and technology together somehow. But anyways, being organized is super important. And what I do is I have a little sticky note extension on Google Chrome where I plan out everything I'm gonna do during the day, and I write down the times that I'm gonna do to take the time I'm gonna spend on each task. And that way I don't miss any deadlines and I'm using my time wisely, because it is so important, especially like you don't want to miss any deadlines and you don't want to miss anything important that you wanted to do during the day. But I find that it's a really good resource. I've been doing it since I was in grade 9 and it's worked really well for me. And I've heard that like making checklists is a thing that works good for a lot of people. So yeah, in terms of mental health, I kind of touched on this earlier, but definitely taking breaks and at least putting some time during the day dedicated to something that isn't work related and is just for fun for you, because you should also taking care of you should also be an assignment, I guess. Like um it's so important because I've had to deal with not only like my mental health but my physical health not doing well because of all the work that I'm doing, and my doctor is like, put it in your checklist, do something good for Sarah, just do it. So I'm like, now I just tell that to everyone, like it's so important to give that time to yourself because you deserve it. So yeah.
Yeah, those are both definitely those are both hard to do. I know, like writing on the checklist, basically, like, um, you know, for me, often on the checklist, I'll be like, okay, workout or like paint something for fun or whatever, because especially with like turning art into a business, I'm often just making stuff for it and not making stuff for fun, which is, I mean, dangerous because then it leads to burnout. And I've been getting better at it slightly, but it's still hard. And so remembering to do things for fun is important. And also just to touch on that, like school work balance. It's hard. It's been easier because school has been a bit of a mess this year. So it's been like part-time, which has actually been helpful. But usually my best kind of tip for that is just get everything ready over breaks. So I'll often create a lot of like social media content and update my website and do all of that over summer or winter break or spring break, so that during the school year there's still some work, but it's more just kind of upkeep instead of big projects. And then also I just put in the chat links to where you can find all of these projects and Future Blue. So we're all on Instagram. That's probably, I know we all update lots there. And then there's website links there. And let me know if there's any other links I should put in there, you too.
Yeah, cool. So I totally agree. Google Calendar is a good friend of mine. I really like to visualize like what's going on over the day, and just being able to plan out like little things and know that you've actually got everything covered, thinking about how much time that you've got and how much time that you want to contribute towards XYZ is really helpful. And then taking time out for yourself. And I think that is interesting because actually like poetry is often that thing that I take the time when I take out the time I take out for myself, but then it's also infused within my like advocacy work. So I think just drawing the boundary between like, this is poetry that I'm doing for advocacy, and this is just poetry for me that I'm just doing to like ease my mind, or just sometimes just taking a complete step away from art and just going for a run, going for a bike, and or playing music and doing other things that you really love to do. And I think it's also interesting, like with balancing school, uni, everything else, I've found that my advocacy work is actually a platform to channel my channel and apply my knowledge from school or uni. So like, for example, if I'm learning about GIS or learning about some sort of statistical thing, I find that I'm always trying to integrate that into data collection, or trying to minimize biases that may be penetrating through my thought process when I'm collecting or visualizing data. So yeah, so then I guess you feel like you're not compartmentalizing your learning, and you're not isolating school from like environmental action. You're trying to integrate that as much as possible.
Yeah, just to highlight what you just said, Ewen, it is really interesting, and it's not something I noticed until recently, that the kind of things I do for fun and the advocacy work and school all bleed into each other. And so this double-edged sword, because that can be so helpful, right? Because what you learn at school is so applicable. And even I've taken the advocacy work or the artwork and used it as school projects. But on the other hand, being conscious of that and then setting up boundaries to separate what you don't want to bleed into it is also really important, so that you don't like lose yourself completely to the work. You guys are like killing it with these question transitions, because our next question is actually what are our favorite tools to organize projects? So we already talked about like checklists and Google Docs and Google Calendar. And I know recently for the fellowship, we use Discord to communicate, which works pretty well. We use Airtable, which I'm just getting used to, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it because I like it so far. I've also used Notion, which is very similar to Airtable in that you can do all of the like calendar views and grid views, but it's like a personal setup. So I'll use that for checklists. But yeah, what other tools do you guys use?
I mean, a really big one that I use and we've used in the fellowship or in the Future Belief Council is Canva. Canva is such a goldmine for our organization. We use it to create our posts, our Instagram stories, and our newsletter. It has a lot of different free features. Like there's a premium, but I've always used the free version. So for our posts, we first decided, so when we first created our organization, we decided on a logo and brand colors. And so we try to incorporate all these colors into each of our posts so that we have a cohesive theme on our Instagram. And Canva is really useful for this because you can directly copy and paste color codes and different elements and fonts that you've used in previous posts that you've made. And we reuse a lot of templates that we've made for specific posts. So with Canva, you can easily make a copy of previous posts that you've made, and it saves a lot of time. And there's also a team function in Canva where you can join a team with someone and all the posts that you make will be automatically shared with them, which is really, really helpful when you're constantly sharing back and forth with someone. For example, I'm always sharing back and forth with my friend that I work with. So yeah, it's really convenient. Canva is like, oh my God, I love Canva.
In terms of organization, I think Sylvia from the Future Blue Youth Council introduced the council to when to meet, which is a meeting scheduler, which is like especially useful if you're collaborating with people across different time zones. So I found like I'm using that in some of the global projects that I'm executing. And then on social media, I found Facebook Business Suite is good when you're scheduling posts and publishing them across multiple platforms like Facebook, Instagram at the same time. And then Linktree is a good thing if you have in your Instagram bio just one link, and then it can take you to different links that you might reference in your posts. Similar to Discord, Slack is a good method for communication especially if you've got a lot going on, and then there's always something happening in different channels that you can have. And I think it's also good to separate that work from like social media, in terms of like your personal social media life. So if you have like a big project going on and everyone's familiar with Slack, that might be a good option. And then also think about things that are specific to your region. So we have this tool called Collaborate in New Zealand, which is like a volunteer database kind of thing. So you can post a listing to search for volunteers, and then they will come straight to your inbox. And so, yeah, just have a look at what's specific to your region and how you can maximize those kinds of tools. And I think it's really all about like trial and error. So when to meet makes no sense if you've got like two people and you can just message the chat and say, hey, when do you want to meet up? And this also can be quite cumbersome if you're all located in the same time zone and you really don't need to use such a tool. And then similarly, like Slack, if no one really likes it, then just you're not going to make use of that functionality, so don't use it. So all of these tools are about trying to make your time more efficient. So think about like when you're using it, is it actually making my time more efficient? What else could I be using?
Yeah, I think it's also important to like kind of pick some and stick to it. Don't use Discord and Slack. Don't have, 3 different group chats going on. Stick to one, commit. And it's really good. Also, again, I think that the Future Blue Youth Council is the biggest fan of Canva ever. I think we should like get sponsored by them or something with the amount we talk about them. But they really are fantastic, especially well, whether you are like a graphic designer or artist or not, anyone can use it. And I've used it for like Bassie's social media, for Ocean Child's social media, for some social media work I've done for other people. It's also great you can transform. So if you have an Instagram post, for this webinar, you actually probably saw the Instagram post, we then turned into a header for Zoom, and they have all the dimensions in Canva already, which makes it so easy to do that. And then my last point was, if you want to use like Airtable, and that's going to be useful if you have a lot going on, and that's great. But also think about, like Yuan was saying, is it easier to just use like all Google stuff? So is Google Sheets actually going to be more efficient? So think about actually what will work best for you, and not just what works best for us, because they're going to be different things. So what are the best resources for funding your grant? Obviously, there's the Future Blue Youth Council Fellowship that we're running, and we will offer funding for your project. There's also the Future Blue, or the Bowsy Ocean Awareness Contest. Yuan talked about how that money went to starting her project. And so did the money from mine, actually. So those can both be great. But apart from Bowsy, what are you guys' recommendations for funding projects?
Yeah, I think first take some time to develop a partnership proposal that really sells your event or your project. So what are the key features of your project? What sets your project apart from other cleanups, other conferences, other webinars, and what will your sponsors or your partners get out of funding your project? So we usually do that as like a PowerPoint presentation, or like, and then maybe convert that to a PDF or pitch it directly to the sponsors. So like think about it, really take the time, and then tailor it to each sponsor as well. So you don't want to just send a mass flurry of like applications or pitches. Just try to tailor it towards whatever situation that you're in. And also, I guess this is how I started off. I didn't have the intention of using this to fund my projects, but it kind of just eventuated. So I volunteered, went to lots of different events, and then I think people start to recognize you, and you recognize familiar faces, and sometimes they just happen to be like sponsors of large organizations that you end up partnering with in the future. So just immersing yourself in that space that you want to be working in the future, and then also tapping into like local councils, regional councils. They've been really helpful for us. And last point, I think you don't always need funding. So like sometimes think about like just being resourceful. What skills does your team have? What skills do people that you can tap into have? And many organizations as well will be willing to sponsor their services as in-kind donations rather than things with monetary donations. So yeah.
For sure, that's a lot of good advice. And I wanted to touch on your point about making it very clear what you need the funding for and what your sponsors are getting out of it. For example, the very first events that we hosted was called Blind Injustice. It was the event that we partnered with different organizations that dedicated to social justice in the Muslim community. So that event was an open mic event where we had different panelists talk about their experiences with social justice, and we also had a segment dedicated to Muslim youth performing spoken word. So we wanted to have prizes, and as a new organization, we didn't really have any funding. So what we did was we made a sponsorship package with different amounts, different funding amounts that we needed and what the sponsor would get out of it. It was like a PDF document, and at the end, the sponsor could sign if they were interested in funding the donating, if they're interested in donating. But yeah, so like we kind of touched on this before, but never hesitate to ask for help from your community to receive funding. Don't wait for someone to offer you funding. Go out there and request it yourself, because sometimes people will help and it really makes a huge difference. And also in terms of grants, one thing I've noticed that some cities actually offer grants for community work, like community work projects that you can apply for. So it wouldn't hurt to check and see if your city has something like that. And even if they don't, ask anyway, because maybe they'll have some money set aside somewhere. And if your project really resonates with them, you never know. It doesn't hurt to ask. It doesn't take too much time. So yeah.
Yes, especially the city grant thing. Not only your city, I know in Canada, provincially, there's grants as well as federally. So see if your state or province or region offers grants as well as your country. Or sometimes it'll just be organizations. And then I also really like the point of kind of networking with organizations and making sure you get your name out there, because even if they can't offer support right now, down the line or with a different kind of offshoot of a project, they may be able to. And also think about what type of resources can you get from the people around you, or people in your city, country, province, whatever, that are not monetary. Because sometimes, I know I was working with another organization recently, and they did something where they had posters in all of the windows of businesses, and all of the businesses, when we talked to them, said, like, we can't offer any sponsorship right now. It's just been a pandemic, they've lost business, but they were all so happy to put posters up in their windows. And then down the line, maybe they can support in other ways, like hosting events, or donating prizes, anything like that. But think about what you can kind of exchange with other businesses. So by doing that poster project, people found out about the posters and went down and visited those businesses. So think about exchanges, think about non-monetary kind of sponsors or help. And again, don't be afraid to reach out to people online too. That's another way that you can get support. Some organizations will offer funding or resources because they really like youth, and youth in the ocean and youth in the environment is often something that people get very excited about. So I think our very last question of this webinar, it's flown by, is what advice do you have for people for starting a project? What haven't we talked about? What's your one big thing that everyone needs to remember? I know it's a big question, but it's an important one. So what's your one piece of advice for people starting a project?
Okay, I'll go first. Speaking from experience, biggest advice, don't do this alone. It might feel tempting to create a whole organization or initiative by yourself, but you will genuinely get a lot farther if you have people by your side backing you up. And it will ease the workload a lot more, and it will help your project spread faster because you'll have a bigger network. And in the end, environmental justice, social advocacy, anything, environmental justice, ocean advocacy, they're all global issues. So it can only be stopped if communities from around the world join together to create an impact. So definitely invite people in your communities to participate in your project, to help organize, lead, and make a difference.
Yeah, my advice, that was also going to be my advice, but I'll change it a little. My advice would be always to look for feedback. So if it's an event in the field, take the time to chat with everyone that's attended about what they want to see in the future, what they liked, because really that's the community that you're serving and that you want to deliver maximum impact to. And then if not, send out feedback forms or have a form they can access before they leave so that you can always be thinking about how you can improve the work that you're doing. And then also just being thankful, showing gratitude, and that's going to get you places as well.
Okay, you guys both said some very good piece of advice that I was going to say, but I think my other piece of advice is just go for it. Like, it is so tempting to have all of these great ideas and feel like you can't do it because you are, alone or don't have funding or feel like you're not in a region where you're close to water or something, anything. But really just go for it. And even if you start out alone, you will find people along the way that'll make it easier. Like Sarah was saying, definitely find people, but you will pretty quickly. So that's important. But yeah, just go for it. Don't be afraid to take the leap and build your wings on the way down, as the expression goes. So that is my advice. And that's it. So Sarah, do you want to talk more about the fellowship and tell people about our upcoming webinars?
Yeah, so this is our final bow seat plug of the day. So now that you've heard from us and our projects, it's your turn. So Bowseat's Future Blue Youth Council has been working hard to create our fellowship program, which is an initiative dedicated to providing funding for new environmental projects created by youth. Not only can you get financial support, but we also provide mentoring through toolkit resources on our website, as well as webinars and office hours. And speaking of webinars and office hours, our next webinar is coming up on July 11th at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, which is about completing the grant application. So if you're nervous about the August 1st deadline and you need some help understanding the budget template, you can join Future Blue Youth Council members Akila, Jude, Sylvia, and our beautiful Ewen, who's here for this webinar, and they'll help address some of your application worries, provide general tips, and walk through some of the more tricky parts of the Future Blue Fellowship application. And our next office hours webinar is on July 24th at midnight, where you can ask any questions that you have about the council, the fellowship, or about Bowseat. And applications for the fellowship will close on August 1st at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. And for more information about the application process, including rules and eligibility, be sure to visit bowseat.org. And if you have any questions, feel free to email us or check out our Instagram account at future.blue.youth.council. And we're so excited to see your applications and give your incredible projects a helping hand. We hope you benefited from this webinar, and thank you so much for coming out and hanging through the end.
Yes, thank you everyone, and we will see you on our Instagram page, on our website, and at our next webinar. So thank you again, and a big thank you to Sarah and Ewen for coming and hanging out with me and sharing all of the wonderful advice and information about their projects. And I know I really now want to go to an EnviroPAST conference. And Sarah, I want you to tell me, I will look at your Instagram, but I want you to tell me when your next event is, because I'd love to go. So again, a big thank you to you all, and I will see you all soon. So bye.